What's your name? What's your role? And where do you work?
Hey, I'm Lucas. I'm the CEO and one of the founders of Loft. We are the maintainers of vCluster, DevPod, and a couple of other open source projects.
What are 3 Kubernetes emerging tools that you're keeping an eye on?
I think there are a couple of really interesting tools in the space right now. KCP is one of the lesser known tools probably. I think they just entered Sandbox with the CNCF. It's definitely a tool worth checking out. It takes a very different approach of like how to use Kubernetes, less about pods and more about what the Kubernetes API could be. I think if I had to think about 2 more tools, OpenCost I think is an interesting one. I think there's a more condensed focus on making Kubernetes more efficient, and tracking cost is a good starting point for that. And then KubeVirt is, I think, a project that gains a lot of attention recently. Bringing virtual machines closer to Kubernetes and having you manage virtual machines with Kubernetes, I think that's a pretty fascinating project too.
One of our guests, Artem, shared that between a single cluster with multiple environments and dedicated clusters per environment, the latter is easier to manage for a small team. When you share a cluster with multiple teams, should you share a single cluster or offer a dedicated cluster per tenant? What does your choice depend on?
Yeah, I mean, single cluster versus multi-tenant clusters, right? Single tenant versus multi-tenant. That's a really difficult problem. I think in the earlier years of Kubernetes, it was all about how big can the cluster get? And then we kind of forgot about that and created a whole bunch of little clusters. I kind of blame the cloud providers a little bit for making it too easy to spin up clusters. But it's a pretty valid question to actually reflect on. When can you share a cluster and when you really need to have a separate cluster? My standpoint is really look at vCluster, which is kind of in the middle, right? So it gives you the feeling like you have a real cluster, but you're actually running an underlying multi-tenant cluster. So you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. And I think that's a nice middle ground.
One of our guests, Steven, shared some simple but effective advice on building Kubernetes operators. Keep it simple and use multiple CRDs. Do you have any advice on building operators?
Operators are amazing. I think in the Kubernetes space, that's really a game changer, right? It allows you to extend the Kubernetes API, and I think that's part of the power of Kubernetes. It is not just what we bake into the code and to the core, right? It's what we make out of it in the extension layers, right? I think building CRDs, it's really about how can you optimize, the way to ship new versions of these operators and CRDs quickly. We all know it's tough to build this because you kind of need a separate cluster to work on this. So as lightweight as you can have it, allows you to work on a local cluster like Kind or on Docker Desktop. They have a Kubernetes cluster built in, or Rancher Desktop, tools like that, right? If you need more of the cloud power or direct connection to a cloud provider, and you don't want to create 8 different EKS clusters to work in AWS, then it's a nice idea to have one EKS cluster, but not work in that shared cluster, because you're probably gonna get in each other's way, because CRDs are global objects. That's another really good use case for using a vCluster, right? Spin up 8 vClusters. Your CRDs are gonna be isolated, but you're still gonna run in the same EKS cluster, improving efficiency to work together quite a bit.
Our guest Ghazal prefers Carpenter over Cluster Autoscaler for cluster autoscaling, highlighting its benefits and reliability. In particular, Ghazal and his team used Carpenter to consolidate workloads and save around 40% of their cloud bill. Carpenter was also donated from AWS to the Kubernetes project. How do you think this will shape the future of autoscaling in Kubernetes?
I think Carpenter is amazing. We use it internally. We recommend it to our vCluster user base a lot, because if you have large multi-tenant clusters, you want to make sure that when you have idle resources that are turned off, that people can dynamically launch more resources and nodes get added. And the beautiful thing about Carpenter is, the static node pools that you're configuring, everything becomes a lot more flexible, right? Because, it's really hard. I saw, pre-Carpenter, I saw a lot of discussions, what is the right node size for me, right? In Carpenter today, you just give it a whole bunch of different node sizes, right? And it's gonna pick for you, right? That is not a decision you should statically make at one point in time. It's something that an algorithm can figure out for you. And Carpenter is really good at that. So I would definitely have everybody check that project out.
Kubernetes turned 10 years old this year. What should we expect in the next 10 years to come?
Hopefully a whole bunch more development in Kubernetes. Hopefully that landscape is growing even further. I know it's already pretty large, but I think there's still a lot of attention on Kubernetes, and it's such a fundamental technology, so I don't think the work ever stops. I do hope that we won't see a version 2 of Kubernetes, to be quite honest. Hopefully we'll have like version 137 in 10 years, right? Because version 2 means there's going to be breaking changes, and that would probably be not a great idea for any operator who runs a lot of Kubernetes clusters today. So hopefully a lot of new features, a lot of new development, but please no breaking changes on a version 2.
What's next for you?
What's next for us? We're making vCluster obviously as the de facto solution for multi-tenant Kubernetes clusters, and we hope to see it in a lot more use cases. Most recently, I saw someone put it in CI pipelines, spin up 5 different clusters with 5 different Kubernetes versions to test an operator in their CI pipelines, right? Because a vCluster starts in like 5 or 6 seconds, something you couldn't even do with a traditional cluster, right? That would take like 30 minutes plus to start. Nobody wants to do that in CI, especially if you have to spin up 5 or 6 of these clusters. And I'm just kind of curious to see what other use cases are out there. Recently, I saw another user use it for sharding the Kubernetes API. If you have a really large cluster, control plane is under a lot of load, right? Having the idea of like splitting it up into smaller clusters, but still tying it back to one underlying cluster, is fascinating to me. So I think, exploring more of these use cases, that's what I'm really excited about.
How can people get in touch with you?
You'll find me on LinkedIn. You find me in our community Slack channel. Head to slack.vcluster.com. And yeah, don't be shy. If I'm running around at KubeCon, just say hi and we'll have a chat.